Wyoming, 1881. The wind rolled over the empty plains like a restless spirit, carrying dust, silence, and one man's destiny. On a lonely stretch of road, Cowboy Elias Granger reined in his horse when he saw her, a woman limping through the heat, dress torn, face pale as moonlight. She looked too proud to beg, yet too broken to go on. Who was she? Why was she out here, miles from any town or mercy? Would you have stopped knowing that helping a stranger could cost you everything? As Elias lifted her into his saddle, neither of them knew this single act of kindness would unravel a past full of pain, deceit, and a love strong enough to survive the wilderness itself. Because sometimes, fate doesn't arrive with thunder. It limps down a dusty road, waiting for someone brave enough to stop. So before we begin this journey through heartbreak, honor, and redemption, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Frontier Hearts. Settle in by the fire, friend. This is the story of Elias Granger and Clara Wren, and the day love found them on the road home. The sun was lowering over Dakota Territory, 1879 spreading long ribbons of gold across the open plains. The road to Hollow Creek Ranch stretched endlessly, winding between clusters of dry sage and weathered cottonwoods. Dust clung to the boots of Caleb Turner, a man whose life had become as solitary as the land he called home. His horse, Jasper, moved at an easy pace, hooves stirring up tiny storms that vanished as quickly as they were born. Caleb had spent most of his 35 years with the wind as his only companion, quiet, dependable, never asking questions. Folks in the nearby town of Red Bluff called him the man with the silent eyes, a drifter who'd built a small ranch after years of driving cattle, for men richer and colder than himself. He wasn't bitter, just still. Life had taken more than it had given, and Caleb had learned not to expect kindness from the world. But that evening, fate waited for him at a bend in the dusty trail. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, a shimmer in the heat, a mirage shaped like a person. Then Jasper snorted and slowed, and Caleb saw her clearly, a woman, stumbling through the fading sunlight, one hand gripping her torn skirt, the other pressed to her side. She was barefoot, her ankle swollen, her face pale beneath a curtain of wind-tangled hair. Each step looked like it might be her last. Caleb dismounted without a word. The woman startled, turning sharply, her blue-gray eyes wide with fear. "It's all right," Caleb said softly, voice roughened by disuse. "I'm not here to hurt you." She tried to straighten, as if pride alone could hold her upright. "Please, I just need to reach the next town. There isn't one for 20 miles, Caleb replied. "And you won't make it 5 with that ankle." He took a step closer, cautious as if approaching a wild creature. The woman hesitated, torn between mistrust and desperation. Her lips trembled. "Who are you? Name's Caleb Turner. My ranch is a few miles west." She looked past him, scanning the empty horizon, then back to his face. Something in his tone, steady, unhurried, seemed to reach her. Her shoulders sagged, the fight slipping from her posture. "I'm Nora," she murmured, voice barely above the wind. "Nora Ellis." Caleb nodded, as if her name had weight he would carry carefully. "All right, Miss Ellis, let's get you off your feet." When he reached for her arm, she flinched not from pain, but memory. Caleb paused, letting silence stretch between them. Only the wind moved. Then slowly, she let him take her hand. His touch was firm, calloused, yet gentle. He lifted her onto Jasper's back, the horse shifting patiently beneath her slight weight. As they rode toward Hollow Creek, twilight deepened into a wash of indigo, The sky stretched endless above them, stitched with the first faint stars. For a long while, neither spoke. The rhythm of Jasper's hooves was steady, like a heartbeat in the quiet. Finally, Nora broke the silence. "You didn't ask what happened to me." "No," Caleb said. "Didn't figure it was my right." She looked down at him from the saddle, trying to read the face shadowed beneath his hat. "You think I'm trouble?" Caleb almost smiled a rare, fleeting curve at the corner of his mouth. "Everyone out here's trouble in one way or another." That earned a faint, surprised laugh from her, a sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. She turned her gaze back to the horizon, where a distant line of dark trees marked safety, or something like it. They rode on. When the lights of the ranch flickered into view, Nora swayed in the saddle, her strength nearly gone. Caleb steadied her with one arm. The warmth of her body against his startled him, not the feeling itself, but the sudden ache it stirred. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd held another human being close. Old Joe Hanley, Caleb's hired hand and closest thing to family, stepped out of the barn when he heard the hoofbeats. His weathered face tightened as he saw the limp figure on the horse. "Who's this?" he asked quietly. "A lady hurt on the road." Caleb answered, "Needs a place to rest." Joe gave him a long look, the kind that held both questions and quiet understanding. "Then she's come to the right place." Inside the ranch house, the firelight painted soft gold across rough-hewn walls. Nora's hand shook as Caleb poured water into a basin. She tried to protest when he knelt to tend her ankle, but he ignored her words and focused on the wound. The swelling was bad, the skin scraped raw, but not broken. He worked with the quiet patience of a man used to fixing what life had tried to break. "You should eat," he said when he was done. "There's stew on the stove." Nora shook her head. "You shouldn't trouble yourself. You don't even know me." Caleb met her gaze, his voice low but steady. "Don't need to know you to see you need help." Her eyes softened, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. Not gratitude exactly, but recognition. Two people, both marked by loss, meeting in a place where kindness had almost gone extinct. When she finally drifted into sleep on the small cot by the fire, Caleb stepped outside. The prairie was quiet now, except for the whisper of the wind through the dry grass. He looked out into the darkness and wondered who was Nora Ellis, really, and what shadows chased her across this empty land. The night felt different, alive with questions he couldn't yet name. As he walked back toward the barn, he found himself glancing once more at the faint light glowing through the cabin window. Something told him that the stranger sleeping inside would change everything he thought he knew about solitude and perhaps about himself. And as dawn crept over the plains, painting the world in soft amber light, Caleb Turner realized that some roads don't end where you expect they lead you straight into another soul's story, waiting to be written. By the time the last streak of sunlight faded behind the hills, the chill of evening had begun to creep in. The prairie changed color as the sky darkened from gold to rust, then to a quiet violet that seemed to hum with secrets. Caleb walked beside his horse, one steady hand on the reins, the other ready in case Nora Ellis lost her grip again. She sat sideways in the saddle, her injured ankle bound in a strip of linen he had torn from his shirt. The hem of her dress fluttered with each gust of wind. The air carried the faint smell of sage and wood smoke, distant, familiar, comforting. Neither spoke for a while. The road stretched empty ahead, the silence between them both fragile and full. Caleb wasn't used to company, and Nora seemed wary of every word, as though speech itself might betray her. Still, there was something about her quiet. It wasn't cold. It was the silence of someone who had endured too much noise from a world that had not listened. "Finally," she asked, "you live out here all alone?" Caleb nodded. "Just me and Joe Hanley. He helps with the stock when his joints allow it. We don't have much, but the land's honest. Can't say that about most folks." She smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the horizon. Honest land. I suppose that's rare these days. Her voice was low and rough around the edges, like someone who hadn't spoken in days. Caleb noticed how her hands clutched the saddle horn, not out of fear of falling, but as if she were holding on to something deeper, something she couldn't afford to lose. "You from Red Bluff?" he asked after a moment. She hesitated. "No. Farther east? Near the river." He waited, hoping for more, but she didn't go on. He didn't press. He'd learned long ago that stories told too soon tend to unravel before they're ready. The trail dipped into a shallow ravine where the last light of sunset clung to the rocks. Nora winced as Jasper climbed the incline, and Caleb steadied her knee with his hand. She tensed, surprised, but didn't pull away. "Sorry," he murmured. "Didn't mean to startle you." "It's all right," she said softly. Then, after a pause, "You're kind." He almost laughed, a quiet, uncertain sound. "No, just doing what needs doing." "Kindness," she whispered, "isn't what most men think needs doing." That silenced him for a time. Her words lingered like smoke, curling through his thoughts. He wondered what kind of men she had known, and what kind of world had driven her out into the wild, barefoot and alone. They crested the hill just as the first stars broke through the velvet dusk. In the distance, the faint light from the ranch flickered like a promise. Nora seemed to notice it too. Her shoulders loosened, the tight line of her jaw softening. "That's your place?" she asked. "Yeah," Caleb said. "Home, for what it's worth." "It's beautiful," she murmured. He looked at her, then really looked. Dust clung to her face, her hair tangled by wind. Yet there was a quiet dignity in her posture, a grace that not even hardship could erase. She carried her pain with a kind of defiance that stirred something long dormant in him. The horse slowed as they reached the gate. Caleb lifted Nora gently down, careful not to jar her injured leg. She tried to stand, but faltered. Without a word, he caught her one arm around her back, the other beneath her knees, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. Her breath hitched, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met in the dim starlight. It was not romance that filled that moment, nor pity. It was recognition. Two weary souls seeing the reflection of their own scars in another. The warmth of his arms startled her. It had been a long time since anyone had held her without demand or cruelty.
20 years I've been tracking
She looked away, trying to hide the sudden tremor in her hands. "Thank you," she said softly. Caleb nodded. "Let's get you inside before the night turns mean." Inside the small ranch house, the air smelled of pine and old coffee. The fire in the stone hearth burned low, casting a soft glow across the room. Joe Hanley had left a pot of stew on the stove and a lantern by the window. Caleb eased Nora into a chair near the fire, then poured her a cup of water. She took it with both hands, her fingers trembling. "I don't mean to be a burden," she whispered. "You're not," he said simply. "A burden's something you choose to carry. You didn't ask for this. For the first time." She smiled, not wide, not long, but real. It reached her eyes, and for a moment the years seemed to fall away from her face. The fire crackled softly, filling the silence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes like restless ghosts. Caleb stirred the stew and handed her a bowl. She hesitated, then began to eat, slow and careful, as though she feared the moment might vanish if she took too much. Caleb leaned against the wall, watching her. The lamplight softened her features, and he caught himself wondering about the life she'd left behind, who had hurt her, what she was running from. He didn't ask. Some questions could wait until morning. When she had finished, he showed her the small cot by the fire. "You can rest here tonight. I'll sleep out in the barn." She looked up, startled. "You don't have to, I know." He gave a small, tired smile. "But I will." Her gaze followed him as he lifted his coat from the chair and stepped outside. The door creaked softly behind him, and the night swallowed the sound. Nora lay back, staring into the fire until her eyelids grew heavy. For the first time in many nights, she slept without fear. Outside, Caleb looked up at the stars. The prairie stretched endless before him, quiet and silver under the moonlight. Something inside him shifted small, but undeniable. He couldn't name it yet, but it felt like the beginning of something he'd forgotten how to hope for. By morning, the storm in the sky had passed, but another softer, more human had settled between them. In the warmth of Hollow Creek Ranch, two strangers began to discover what it meant to be safe again. The first light of dawn crept quietly across the plains, seeping through the thin curtains of the small ranch house. Inside, Nora Ellis stirred awake to the crackle of firewood and the faint aroma of coffee. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, only that it was warm, still, and safe. The ache in her leg reminded her of everything that had happened the road. The cowboy, his silence, his unexpected kindness. Caleb Turner stood by the window, shirt sleeves rolled up, pouring water into a tin basin. The light caught the faint scars along his forearm, the kind earned from years of work and maybe a few mistakes. When he turned, their eyes met. "You slept through the night," he said quietly. "I can't remember the last time I did," she replied. He gave a small nod, not asking more. The simplicity of it, no questions, no judgment, felt like grace. Outside, the land was waking too. Joe Hanley was already in the yard, tending to the horses. His figure moved slow and steady in the morning mist. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, the kind of smell that makes a person believe life can start over, even out here, where the world still felt unfinished. Caleb set the basin on the table beside her. "We need to look at that ankle again," he said. Nora hesitated, clutching the edge of the blanket. "You've done enough already." "Maybe," he said, crouching down beside her. "But I've seen enough busted bones to know what happens when you leave them alone." She gave a quiet laugh, the first sound of genuine lightness since he'd found her. "You talk like a doctor, more like a man who's patched up too many horses," he said. When he lifted the bandage, she winced. The skin was bruised, swollen, but the bleeding had stopped. He cleaned it with gentle care, movements precise and slow. The touch was firm, but never rough. He worked with the patience of someone who knew pain not from books, but from life. She studied him in silence, the steady hands, the quiet focus, the faint crease between his brows when he worked. There was a strength in him that wasn't loud or showy. It was the kind that simply endures. When he finished, he looked up at her. "You'll be walking again soon," he said. "Just don't rush it. I'm not sure I have anywhere left to go. she murmured. Caleb didn't answer. He only tied the bandage carefully and stood. Then you can stay here until you figure it out. The words hung in the air plain, without expectation, yet they settled deep inside her. No one had offered her a place without asking something in return for a long, long time. He stepped outside soon after, leaving her to rest. Through the window, she could see him and Joe working side by side, moving hay, checking the fences, speaking in the unhurried language of men who had learned the rhythm of solitude. Joe looked toward the house at one point and tipped his hat. A silent greeting. She smiled back faintly. When Caleb returned at midday, he brought a bowl of stew. "It's not much," he said, "but it's warm." She accepted it with both hands, feeling the heat seep into her fingers. "Thank you. For everything." He shrugged. No one should be left out there like that. Something in his tone made her ask, "Were you?" He froze for a moment, just a flicker before replying, "Once." Then he changed the subject, asking if she needed more blankets. She didn't press him, but the question lingered between them like a candle burning low, steady but not yet out. Later that evening, when Joe retired to his cabin behind the barn, the house grew quiet again. Nora sat near the fire, the flickering light painting her face in amber tones. Caleb busied himself at the table, mending a leather strap, but every so often his gaze lifted toward her. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the windows. Inside, two lives once separate, now woven by circumstance, found a strange peace in the shared silence. Nora spoke first. "You're not a man of many words, are you?" He looked up, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Never saw much use for them. Words don't fix fences." She chuckled quietly. "No, but they can fix people. Sometimes." He leaned back, studying her in the firelight. "Maybe, but they can break them too." There was truth in that, and she didn't argue. For a long moment, they simply listened to the crackle of the logs, the soft groan of the wooden beams as the wind shifted outside. "You've been through something," Caleb said finally. "I won't ask what, but I hope you know you're safe here." Her eyes shimmered, but not with tears, more like a quiet acknowledgement of being seen. "I do," she whispered. "Thank you." When it grew late, he rose, took his coat, and moved toward the door. "You take the bed tonight," he said. "I'll sleep out in the barn. The horses are good company." She wanted to protest, but something about his tone, gentle yet firm, made her stop. Instead, she said, "You're a good man. Caleb Turner." He paused in the doorway, looking out toward the dark yard. "Just a man trying to do right," he said softly. Then he was gone. Through the small window, she watched him cross the yard, his figure outlined against the starlit sky. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that tonight, for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of it. Inside the barn, Caleb lay on a bed of hay, staring at the rafters. The night air smelled of cedar and smoke. Somewhere beyond the hills, a coyote called out, lonely and low. He thought of the woman inside his house, her weary eyes, her unspoken pain, and felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Maybe this was what it meant to still believe not in miracles, but in mercy. The days that followed moved gently, like ripples across a quiet pond. Beneath the simple rhythm of ranch life, trust began to take root, fragile, almost invisible, yet strong enough to change the shape of two lonely hearts. Morning came softly to Hollow Creek Ranch, spreading a pale gold across the prairie grass and the wooden fences that marked Caleb Turner's world. The land was quiet, save for the lowing of cattle and the faint creak of the windmill turning against the wind. Inside the small house, Nora Ellis sat by the window, her ankle still bandaged, her hands resting on her lap. It had been nearly a week since Caleb had found her on the road 7 days of silence, broken only by the rhythm of ordinary kindness. He cooked. She mended what she could reach from her chair. Sometimes they talked, but more often they didn't need to. The silence between them had grown comfortable, like a well-worn quilt that didn't need mending. Caleb entered carrying a bucket of water from the well. He set it down by the stove, wiped his hands on a rag, and nodded toward her. "You're moving better," he said. "A little," she replied, testing her foot. "I tried walking to the porch this morning." His brow furrowed, half stern, half amused. "You're as stubborn as one of my mules." She smiled the kind of smile that came slow, uncertain, but real. "I'll take that as a compliment." He chuckled, a sound that surprised even him. "I meant it that way." Joe Hanley, the old ranch hand, pushed open the door just then, bringing with him a gust of crisp autumn air. "Coffee's hot," he asked, pretending not to notice the warmth between them. "Always," Caleb said, reaching for another cup. They ate together a simple breakfast of biscuits and beans while the light shifted through the cabin. It wasn't much, but there was comfort in the routine. Joe told a story about his younger days working cattle drives through Wyoming, his voice low and gravelly. Nora listened with quiet laughter, her eyes shining. For the first time since arriving, she seemed less like a lost traveler and more like someone who belonged. When Joe left for the fields, Caleb lingered by the stove. "You keep smiling like that," he said, "and I might forget you ever showed up here half dead." "Then maybe I should frown more often," she teased. He turned toward her, the firelight catching the edge of his jaw. "No," he said softly, "you shouldn't." The room went still. Outside, the wind sighed through the grass, and the world seemed to pause between them. Nora looked away first, pretending to fuss with her skirt. Caleb busied himself with his work, though his thoughts were far from the tools in his hands. That evening, when the sky burned orange over the plains, they sat together by the fire. Joe had gone to bed early, leaving the two of them alone in the flickering glow. Nora stirred the pot on the stove while Caleb cleaned his rifle, a ritual of habit more than need. "You must have seen a lot of this land," she said. He nodded. "Every bit of it's hard-earned. The winters'll break you if the wind doesn't first." She turned to him, her voice quiet but steady. "And yet you stay." He shrugged. "A man's got to stay somewhere." She studied him for a long moment. "Or maybe you stay because there's something worth staying for." Her words caught him off guard. He looked into the fire instead of her eyes. "Used to think so," he said, "before the war took it all." She didn't ask which war, or who he'd lost. Some things didn't need telling to be understood. "Instead," she said, "then maybe the land isn't what's left. Caleb, maybe it's what's waiting." He met her gaze then, a slow, uncertain glance that held both weariness and something tender, unspoken. "You sound like you believe in second chances." "I have to," she said, her voice trembling just enough to betray the truth. "It's the only thing that keeps me walking." A log cracked in the fire. He wanted to ask her what she meant, what she had run from, but he didn't. He'd learned that sometimes. The only way to let a wound heal is to give it silence and space. Instead, he poured them each a cup of coffee, the rich, bitter scent filling the air. They sat shoulder to shoulder, not speaking, the warmth from the fire wrapping around them like a shared secret. Later, when she tried to stand, her leg faltered again. He caught her instinctively strong arm steadying her. For a heartbeat, she was close enough to hear his breathing, to feel the rough fabric of his shirt against her cheek. "I've got you," he said quietly. She looked up, eyes glistening. "I know." He helped her to the chair, their hands brushing in the exchange a fleeting touch that lingered longer than it should have. That night, Caleb sat alone outside the house, beneath a sky freckled with stars. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of rain far off to the west. He thought about the woman sleeping inside, about her strength, her fragility, the way her voice softened the edges of his silence. He wasn't sure what this feeling was, this cautious stirring that felt too alive to ignore. He only knew that something inside him had begun to thaw, like ice breaking under spring water. Inside, Nora lay awake too, staring at the wooden beams above her. She listened to the steady creak of the windmill, to the faint hum of the prairie beyond. For the first time in months, her heart didn't ache with fear. Instead, it ached with something gentler hope, perhaps, or the memory of it. In the quiet of that Montana night, two souls scarred by distance and time found themselves inching toward something fragile and unspoken trust. But peace on the frontier never lasted long. And when Caleb rode into town the next morning for supplies, he carried with him not just provisions, but the first whispers of trouble that would soon test every ounce of trust they had built. The sun had barely risen when Caleb Turner saddled Jasper and headed toward Red Bluff, the nearest town. The air was sharp and cool, filled with the scent of wet earth after a night of light rain. Behind him, the ranch was a quiet patch of gold and green under the morning light, smoke curling lazily from the chimney. Inside, Nora Ellis was still asleep, her breathing even, her face peaceful in a way that made Caleb's chest tighten with something he dared not name. He told Joe to keep an eye on things, then mounted up. The trail to Red Bluff cut through rolling hills and cottonwood groves, the sound of birds just beginning to stir. It was the kind of ride Caleb usually enjoyed time to think, to listen to the rhythm of his own solitude. But today, a strange unease followed him like a shadow. He couldn't say why. Maybe because the quiet had grown too easy. Maybe because, deep down, he knew the frontier had a way of punishing comfort. By mid-morning, the town came into view, a scatter of wooden buildings and muddy streets, the telegraph wires humming faintly above. He dismounted outside Wilkins' general store, tied Jasper to the post, and pushed open the door. The familiar jingle of the bell greeted him, along with the smell of coffee, tobacco, and sawdust. Behind the counter, Tom Wilkins, a broad-shouldered man with a handlebar mustache, looked up from sorting beans. "Well, if it ain't Caleb Turner," Tom said with a grin. "Thought you'd gone and married that land of yours. Haven't seen you in weeks." "Been busy," Caleb replied. "Need flour, salt, and coffee. Maybe some sugar, too. Coming right up." As Tom packed the goods, a small group of men stood near the stove, talking in low, animated voices. Caleb caught bits of their conversation. Silver Creek, reward, stolen jewelry, the kind of talk that carried a certain tension beneath it. One of them, a wiry rancher named Frank Dillard, noticed Caleb listening and turned toward him. "You hear about that woman the sheriff's after?" Caleb straightened slightly. "Can't say I have." News came by telegraph yesterday, Frank said. Eager to share. Sheriff down in Silver Creek's looking for a woman young, traveling alone. Says she stole a pile of money in a gold locket from that fancy merchant, Elias Morgan. They're offering a good reward for her capture. Tom Wilkins whistled. That Morgan fellow owns half the freight line between here and Cheyenne. That's the one. Frank nodded. Word is, she charmed him, then cleaned him out. Description says she's slim, brown hair, green eyes, might be traveling under a false name. They say she limps when she walks. Caleb froze. The store seemed to go suddenly still. Even the ticking clock on the wall sounded too loud. Limping, he repeated quietly. Frank nodded. Yeah. Sprained her ankle, trying to run. Maybe. Sheriff thinks she's still somewhere in these parts. Caleb's pulse thudded dully in his ears. He forced a casual tone. You believe it? Frank shrugged. Hard to say. Morgan's not the type to be fooled easy. But women like that, they've got a way of making you forget your good sense. The men laughed. Caleb didn't. He paid for his supplies, thanked Tom, and left the store. The sound of the bell fading behind him. Outside, he untied Jasper with hands that felt strangely unsteady. The morning had grown warmer, but a chill crawled through him all the same. A fugitive, a thief. The words clashed in his mind with the image of the woman back at his ranch, soft-spoken, wary, grateful. He saw her laughing with Joe by the firelight, her hands trembling as she tried to sew, her eyes glimmering when she said thank you. No, something didn't fit. He mounted up, turning Jasper toward home. The ride back felt longer, the road rougher. Dust rose behind the horse's hooves, curling into the air like questions with no answers. By the time the ranch came into view, the sun was already sinking low. Joe was stacking hay near the barn when Caleb dismounted. Get everything you needed? The old man asked. Caleb nodded slowly. Yeah, got everything. But his voice sounded distant, even to himself. Inside the house, Nora was setting the table. She looked up as he entered, her face lighting with that quiet, tentative smile he'd come to recognize. You're back early, she said. Town was quiet, he replied, setting the bag of supplies down on the counter. Did you rest? She nodded. I walked a little today. It feels stronger. That's good. He busied himself with unpacking, careful to keep his expression neutral. She didn't notice or pretended not to. The room filled with the soft clatter of tin cups and the smell of coffee brewing. For a long while, neither spoke. Then she said, Something's wrong. Isn't it? He stopped. What makes you say that? You look like a man who's carrying a storm behind his eyes, she said quietly. He wanted to tell her. The words rose to his lips and stopped there, heavy and bitter. He wasn't sure what the truth would do to her, to the fragile peace between them. Instead, he said, it's nothing. Just town talk. She tilted her head, studying him, the kind that matters. He forced a faint smile, the kind that blows over by morning. But even as he said it, he knew it wouldn't. That night, long after Nora had gone to sleep, Caleb sat by the dying fire, staring into the coals. Outside, the wind had picked up again, carrying with it the restless sound of the plains, a whisper of change, a warning. He thought of the telegraph message, of Morgan's name, of the description that matched too well to be coincidence. Yet in his heart, he couldn't reconcile the two, the woman painted as a thief and the one who sat in his kitchen, mending his shirts with trembling hands. There had to be more to it. Caleb leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking beneath his weight. The glow from the fire cast shifting shadows across the walls. One of them lingered long, stretching thin and uncertain, like the line between doubt and faith. The next morning, as the wind carried a chill from the north, Caleb knew the time for silence was over. He would have to ask, and whatever truth came from Nora's lips would decide the road ahead for them both. Hauntensin. The dawn came gray and restless, clouds moving low over the plains. A storm was brewing somewhere beyond the ridge, though it hadn't yet reached Hollow Creek Ranch. Inside, the fire had burned down to glowing embers, and Caleb Turner sat in his chair, watching the light creep across the floorboards. He hadn't slept much. The words he'd heard in Red Bluff, a woman, young, traveling alone. A limp in her step had followed him through the night like a ghost that refused to be named. When Nora Ellis emerged from her room, she looked rested but wary, as if she sensed something shifting in the air. "You've been up long?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Couldn't sleep." She poured herself a cup of coffee, the steam rising between them like a veil. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Caleb said, "Nora, there's something I need to ask you." She froze, the cup halfway to her lips. "All right." He hesitated. He didn't want to frighten her, but the truth had weight, and it was pressing down on both of them now. "When I was in town yesterday, I heard talk about a woman being wanted. Said she stole money and jewelry from a merchant down in Silver Creek." The sound of the name made her hands tremble. The coffee sloshed against the rim of her cup. They said her name was false. Caleb continued carefully. Said she had brown hair, green eyes, that she was limping. The silence that followed was sharper than any wind that swept the plains. Nora set the cup down slowly. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes, those quiet, haunted eyes, didn't waver. "And you think it's me?" He didn't answer right away. "I think I need to hear the truth from you." For a moment, she looked as though she might deny it, might spin some story to keep her secret safe. But then, something inside her seemed to break not in anger, but in exhaustion. She drew a slow breath. "You deserve to know." She sat by the fire, her hands clasped tight together. When she began to speak, her voice was low and even, the way a person sounds when the worst part of their story has already burned them hollow. "His name is Elias Morgan," she said. "He's a merchant, wealthy, respected. Everyone in Silver Creek knows him. I worked for him once, sewing garments for his wife. After she died, he started calling me to the house for other errands. I thought it was kindness." She stopped, swallowing hard. "But it wasn't. The night it happened, I tried to leave. He wouldn't let me. He said no one would believe me if I spoke, that a man like him could do what he pleased, and a woman like me, a widow with no family, was just a rumor waiting to be buried." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "When I fought back," she continued, "he hit me. He took my mother's locket. She'd given it to me before she died and said it was his now, payment for his trouble. I ran that night, barefoot through the hills. I didn't take his money. I didn't take a thing except what was mine." She looked up then, eyes glistening in the firelight. "But men like Morgan don't lose. They lie. They send telegrams, and before long, the law's looking for a thief instead of a victim." Caleb stared into the flames, his hands tightening around the armrests. The anger he felt was quiet, not wild, the kind that burned slow and deep, like coals beneath ash. After a long silence, he said, "I believe you." Her breath caught. "You. Do I've seen what lies men will tell to stay clean," he said. and I've seen what happens to women who tell the truth too soon." A tear slid down her cheek, but she wiped it away quickly. "You don't have to risk yourself for me, Caleb. I can leave before they come." He shook his head. "You're not going anywhere. Not until we figure out how to set this right. But they'll come here," she whispered. Morgan's men. Maybe the sheriff." "Let them," Caleb said quietly. "This ranch has weathered worse than a few men with badges and empty hearts." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes silenced her. It wasn't defiance or pity, it was conviction. The kind of steadiness that comes from living through storms and choosing, again and again, to stand your ground. He stood, took her hand gently, and said, "You're safe here. I'll see to that." For the first time since she'd fled Silver Creek, Nora let herself believe it. She nodded, her shoulders shaking as she released a breath she'd been holding for weeks. Outside, thunder rumbled low over the hills. Rain began to patter against the window, soft at first, then steady. The smell of wet earth filled the room. Caleb stoked the fire, then turned to her. "That locket, you said it was your mother's." She nodded, a small silver one, engraved with her initials, M.E. He kept it in a drawer in his study. "Then we'll get it back," Caleb said simply. "You don't deserve to have your life written by a man like that." She looked at him, this quiet cowboy, with dust on his boots and kindness in his hands, and felt something shift inside her. Hope, faint but alive. As the rain drummed softly on the roof, she whispered, "You don't even know me. Caleb, why would you do this?" He met her gaze, his voice steady. "Because someone should have helped you when it mattered. And maybe I'm just tired of watching good people run from bad men." For a long moment, they sat together in silence, listening to the rain. The fire crackled softly, painting their faces in amber and gold. Outside, the prairie wind howled, but inside, for the first time, the storm began to quiet. In the days that followed, the rain gave way to sunlight, and a fragile peace returned to Hollow Creek. But beneath that calm, both Caleb and Nora knew the past had not finished its ride toward them, and when it came, they would face it together. The prairie had never looked softer. After days of rain, the grass shone bright and alive beneath the clear Dakota sky, stretching for miles until it met the blue horizon. The air carried that clean, earthy scent that comes after a storm, a promise that even what's been beaten down can rise again. At Hollow Creek Ranch, life slipped back into its slow rhythm. Nora Ellis moved about the small house with a quiet purpose, still limping but growing steadier each day. She swept the floorboards, washed the dishes, and helped Joe Hanley tend to the garden out back. For the first time in a long while, she felt useful again, and that simple feeling of belonging was something she hadn't realized she missed until now. Caleb Turner watched her sometimes from a distance, the way a man watches the sun touch the edges of his land, careful not to disturb it, afraid it might slip away if he looked too long. She had a way of making the place feel warmer, lighter. Even the old barn seemed less lonely when her laughter drifted through the yard. Yet, though peace had returned, it was the kind that trembles, the kind that knows it stands on borrowed time. One morning, Caleb found her in the barn, trying to carry a bucket of water too heavy for her mending ankle. "You'll hurt yourself again," he said, taking it from her hands. "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice betrayed a wince of pain. He shook his head, setting the bucket down gently. "You don't have to prove anything here. Nora," she hesitated, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Maybe I do," she said softly. "I've spent so long being seen as trouble, a burden. I need to feel like I can pull my own weight." Caleb's expression softened. "You've got nothing to prove to me." She looked up at him then, and for a heartbeat, the air between them thickened with something unspoken gratitude. Maybe, or something deeper, still unnamed. Later that day, as the sun dipped low, they worked together fixing the fence line near the creek. Joe teased them gently, his weathered face breaking into a grin. "Never thought I'd see the day Caleb Turner lets someone else touch his fence posts," he said. Caleb smiled faintly. "I'm learning to share the work." "Or the company," Joe muttered under his breath, loud enough for Nora to hear. She laughed, and even Caleb couldn't help the smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. That evening, they ate supper together by the fire, the three of them. A strange little family built by chance and circumstance. The room glowed warm, the fire crackling while the wind outside whispered through the cottonwoods. Joe told stories of his youth, about cattle drives and winters that froze men's breath before it hit the ground. Nora listened, eyes wide, laughing softly at his tall tales. Caleb, sitting across from her, found himself watching her instead of the fire, the way the light danced across her face, softening the years of hardship into something almost serene. When Joe retired for the night, Caleb lingered. Nora began clearing the dishes, but he stopped her. "Leave it," he said. "You've done enough today." She turned toward him, the firelight catching her eyes. "I like doing it. It keeps my hands busy." He nodded, though he didn't move. "You don't have to keep busy here either. You can just be—" She smiled faintly. "You make that sound easy." "It's not," he admitted, "but it gets easier when you're not alone." The words hung there, fragile and real. She looked at him, really looked, and something passed between them then. Something that didn't need speaking. Outside, the coyotes began to sing across the hills, their cries rising and fading like a hymn to the night. Nora walked to the window, looking out over the dark prairie. "It's strange," she said quietly. "I used to be afraid of the dark. Now it feels like the only place the world leaves me alone." Caleb joined her, standing close enough that their shoulders almost brushed. "The dark can be kind," he said. "It hides what we're not ready to face." She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. And when morning comes, he met her gaze. Then we face it. For a long moment, neither moved. The wind brushed against the walls of the cabin, and the fire flickered lower. Finally, Nora exhaled, her breath trembling. "You don't know how much that means. Hearing you say that." "I think I do," he said quietly. When she went to her room that night, Caleb sat alone by the fire, staring into the dying embers. Something inside him stirred a tenderness he hadn't let himself feel in years. It wasn't just pity or protectiveness. It was deeper, steadier, something that asked for patience, for time. He didn't name it yet. He didn't need to. Some things, he thought, are better when they grow slowly like the prairie grass after rain. But the world beyond Hollow Creek was not so still. A week later, as Caleb was riding the fence line at dawn, he saw dust rising on the horizon, a thin, curling trail moving steadily toward the ranch. He narrowed his eyes, watching as the shapes of two riders came into view. They weren't moving fast, but their direction was clear. Visitors were rare out here, rarer still this early in the morning. He felt that old weight settle in his chest again, the quiet knowing that peace on the frontier was never built to last. He turned Jasper back toward the house, where smoke was beginning to rise from the chimney and Nora was stepping onto the porch, brushing her hair back against the wind. She smiled when she saw him, but the sight of those riders in the distance wiped the warmth from his face. "Stay inside," he said, his voice low but firm. "We might be having company." Her smile faded. "What kind of company?" "The kind that doesn't come for coffee," he replied. As the riders drew closer, the dust behind them carried more than the scent of the road. It carried news and danger and the echo of a past that refused to die. The fragile peace of Hollow Creek was about to be tested. By the time Caleb Turner reached the front gate, the riders were close enough for him to make out their faces. The lead horseman raised a hand in greeting Deputy Samuel Reeves, an old friend from Caleb's younger days working cattle near Cheyenne. Reeves was a good man, steady and square-jawed, with a sense of duty that didn't leave much room for fear. Behind him rode a telegraph courier, dust-streaked and weary. "Morning, Caleb," Reeves called as he dismounted. "Didn't think I'd find you all the way out here." Caleb managed a half-smile. "Most folks don't." "What brings you to Hollow Creek?" Reeves reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, edges smudged with dirt and travel. "Got a message from Silver Creek. Figured you ought to see it." Caleb took the telegram, scanning the words slowly. Each line seemed to darken the air around him. "Warrant issued. Wanted for theft and fraud. Nora Ellis. Alias unknown. Large reward for capture. Suspect may be headed west. Signed Elias Morgan. Silver Creek." His hands tightened around the paper. Reeves watched him carefully. "Sound familiar?" Caleb folded the telegram in half, his expression unreadable. "Maybe—" "Caleb," Reeves said quietly, "you've got a woman staying here. Don't you folks in Red Bluff mention something?" Caleb hesitated just long enough to give away what he didn't say. Reeves sighed. "Then you already know who she is." Behind them, the screen door creaked. Nora Ellis stepped onto the porch, the morning light catching her hair. She froze when she saw Reeves. Her hand instinctively went to the railing for balance. Reeves tipped his hat politely, his tone gentle but firm. "Ma'am?" "Deputy," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb glanced between them, then said, "She's done nothing wrong." "Sam?" Reeves nodded. "Maybe not, but Morgan's telling every sheriff from here to Wyoming that she stole from him. There's a bounty out, a big one. $500. Joe Hanley, who had been mending the gate nearby, straightened at that. That kind of money'll bring every drifter and hired gun this side of the mountains." "Exactly," Reeves said. "And that's why I came. Word's spreading fast. You don't have much time." Nora's face went pale. "He's not going to stop." "No," Caleb said softly. "He isn't." Reeves looked between them again, reading the silence. "Caleb, you know I've got a job to do, but I don't take kindly to men like Morgan twisting the law for their own good. If what she told you is true, I'll find a way to help." "She told me the truth," Caleb said simply. "Every word of it." Reeves nodded. "Then you'd better keep her out of sight for a while. I can buy you a few days, maybe a week. After that, I can't promise who'll come knocking." Caleb extended his hand. "Thank you." "Sam!" Reeves shook it, his grip firm. "You've got a good heart." "Turner, just be careful. Hearts get a man killed out here." With that, he mounted his horse and rode off, the courier following behind. Dust rose behind them until they disappeared over the ridge. When the sound of hooves faded, silence filled the yard. Nora still stood on the porch, her hands gripping the rail so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I told you this would happen," she said, her voice breaking. "I should have left when I had the chance." Caleb stepped toward her. "And go where back into the hands of the man who hurt you?" She shook her head. "I can't let you risk everything for me. You don't owe me this." He stopped at the foot of the steps, meeting her eyes. "You're right. I don't owe you. I choose you." The words hung between them, trembling like the leaves in the wind. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Nora turned away, hiding the tears that burned at the corners of her eyes. Joe cleared his throat softly. "We'll need to keep watch tonight," he said. "If Morgan's men are coming, they'll come soon." Caleb nodded. "We'll take turns." That evening, as the sun sank low over the prairie, the ranch grew quiet. Shadows stretched long across the yard, and the smell of rain drifted in from the west. Caleb sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the horizon. Inside, the faint glow of lamplight spilled through the window, Nora's silhouette moving slowly within, tidying the same room she'd been afraid to enter a month ago. She came out after a while, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You should rest," she said. "I will," he replied. "When I know you're safe." She sat beside him, close enough that their arms brushed. "I don't understand how you can be so calm." He smiled faintly. "I'm not. I just learned not to show it." The night deepened around them, the stars glimmering cold and distant. From somewhere in the hills came the cry of a coyote, lonely, echoing. Nora's voice trembled. "I hate that he still has power over me. Even out here." Caleb turned to her, his tone gentle but sure. "He doesn't. Not anymore. You're not running now. Not from him. Not from anyone." She looked at him, searching for doubt and finding none. The wind stirred her hair, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and rain. "You don't know what he's capable of," she whispered. "I know what I am," he said quietly. "And I know I won't let him touch you again." Something in his voice steady, certain, wrapped around her like a shield. She leaned into the silence beside him, the kind that spoke louder than any promise could. Inside, the clock ticked. Outside, the horizon waited vast, unknowable, but theirs for now. The next morning dawned cold and gray. The wind had changed, carrying not the promise of rain this time, but the scent of danger. Before noon, the first riders appeared on the ridge, and Hollow Creek would once again become a place where fate came riding. The sound of hooves reached Caleb Turner before he saw them, a low, steady thunder rolling through the valley, not the casual rhythm of ranchers passing by, but the deliberate beat of men with a purpose. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, his eyes narrowing against the midday glare. 6 riders. Dust rose behind them like a storm's tail. The lead man wore a dark coat and a smile too practiced to be friendly. Caleb didn't need an introduction to know whose men they were. Elias Morgan didn't believe in letting other people settle his problems. Beside him, Joe Hanley came up from the barn, carrying a shotgun. His old eyes were sharp, calm. "They're coming straight for the gate," he said quietly. "I see 'em, from inside the house." Nora Ellis appeared at the door, her face pale. "Caleb." He turned, his voice firm but gentle. "Stay inside. Nora, lock the door. I can help. Not with this." His tone left no room for argument. For a moment, she looked as if she might fight him on it. Then she nodded once, quickly, and disappeared back inside. The riders reached the yard and fanned out in a half circle, boots creaking as they dismounted. Their leader, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward, resting a gloved hand on his revolver. "Afternoon, Turner," he drawled. "Heard you've been keeping company with a lady who doesn't belong to you." Caleb said nothing. The man smirked. "Name's Brig Holloway. Mr. Morgan sent us to collect what's his. Won't take much time, hand her over. We'll be on our way." "Can't do that," Caleb said. His voice was quiet, but it carried, steady as the wind. Brig tilted his head. "You sure you want to make this your fight? Morgan's offering a reward for the girl, and he's paying extra for the man dumb enough to get in his way." Joe stepped forward then, the old shotgun resting easy in his grip. "Then maybe you ought to ask yourselves what your lives are worth." A low murmur passed through the men. One of them spat into the dirt. Another thumbed the hammer on his pistol. Caleb felt the air tighten, thick with the promise of violence. His hand hovered near his revolver, his thumb brushing the worn leather of his holster. Then, from down the trail, came another sound, the sharp crack of hooves, fast and deliberate. A moment later, 3 riders appeared from the south, badges glinting on their vests. Sheriff Henry Tanner led the way, his expression grim. Enough he barked as he reined in his horse. "Put those guns down. Boys, this isn't Silver Creek." Brig turned, his voice slick with mock respect. "Sheriff Tanner, always a pleasure." "Don't start," Tanner said. "I know who you ride for, and I know what he's paying, but this here's Dakota territory, not Morgan's front porch. You've got no authority here." Brig sneered. "We ain't need authority to claim a bounty. You do when I say you do." Tanner's hand hovered over his revolver, and for a long second, the yard went silent. Joe shifted slightly beside Caleb. "Seems you've got a choice, son," he muttered, low enough for only Caleb to hear. Brig's men glanced uneasily at the badges. The rifles. They were hired guns, not fools, and they could count. 3 deputies and 2 ranchers who looked ready to die. Standing up. The odds weren't what they'd expected. "Finally?" Brig clicked his tongue and gave a humorless laugh. "Ain't worth the bullets today." He spat into the dirt. "But Morgan'll hear about this. And next time, Sheriff, you won't be here to play hero." Tanner leaned forward in his saddle. "You tell Morgan if he wants justice, he can come stand before the law like a man not send scavengers to do his dirty work." Briggs smirked, but said nothing more. He swung back into his saddle, signaling to the others. One by one, they turned their horses and rode off, the sound of hooves fading into the hills. When they were gone, Tanner exhaled slowly. "You've made yourself a powerful enemy, Turner." Caleb holstered his gun. He made one first. The sheriff studied him a moment, then nodded. "I figured as much." He turned toward the house. "She inside?" "Yes," Caleb said. "Good. Keep her there for now. I'll send word to Silver Creek, see if I can stir the right kind of trouble for Morgan. But don't trust that he's done. Men like him don't know how to quit." Caleb's eyes flicked toward the horizon, where dust still hung in the air. "Neither do I." Tanner gave a short, approving nod. "I'll be in touch. Stay sharp." The lawman rode off, leaving the ranch quiet again. The wind swept across the open fields, carrying the faint echo of hoofbeats until even that faded. Joe finally let out a long breath, lowering his shotgun. "Well," he said, "that's one way to ruin a perfectly good morning." Caleb almost smiled. "You'd rather be bored. Wouldn't mind it once in a while. Inside. The door creaked open. Nora stepped out, her face pale but determined. "They're gone." "For now," Caleb said. She moved closer, her eyes searching his. "You shouldn't have to fight my battles." He shook his head. "They're ours now." Her throat tightened. "You don't understand. Morgan won't stop until he wins." Caleb's voice was quiet, certain. "Then he's already lost." The words seemed to steady her, though her hand still trembled. He reached out, his rough fingers brushing hers, a simple gesture, but it carried more than any vow could. For a long while, they stood there on the porch, watching the sun break through the clouds. The land stretched out before them vast, untamed, and uncertain. But for that moment, it felt like they could face whatever came next. That night, as the fire burned low and the wind turned colder, Nora made a decision that would change the course of both their lives. She would no longer hide. If there was a chance to clear her name, she would take it, and Caleb, though it tore at his heart, knew he could not hold her back. The air inside the cabin was heavy with silence, the kind that comes after danger is past, but not truly gone. Caleb Turner sat by the fire, oil lamp flickering beside him, cleaning his rifle with slow, practiced motions. His hands were steady, but his mind wasn't. Outside, the prairie lay under a wash of silver moonlight, calm and endless. Inside, everything he cared about was unraveling quietly. Nora Ellis stood by the window, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She hadn't spoken much since the confrontation that morning. Her reflection trembled in the glass half-shadow, half-ghost. When she finally turned to him, her voice was calm, almost too calm. "I can't stay here anymore, Caleb." He stopped, his fingers freezing mid-motion. "You're safe here. For now," she said softly. "But not for long. Morgan's men will come again. They always do. I won't let you fight a war that isn't yours." He looked up at her then, his eyes catching the firelight. "It became mine the moment you walked down that road." Her lips parted, but no words came. She crossed the room and sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "Sheriff Tanner said there's a chance," she began. "He spoke about Granite Springs, about turning myself in. He believes the court there might listen, might actually see the truth if I tell it." Caleb's jaw tightened. "And if they don't, then at least I'll stop running," she said. "I can't live like this, hiding behind your kindness, waiting for the next knock on the door. I need to stand on my own again, even if it breaks me." The fire popped softly between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters like the whisper of something old and restless. Finally, Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You don't owe the world your suffering. Nora, you've already paid enough." Her eyes shone with quiet resolve. "It's not about what I owe. It's about what's right. If I keep running, he wins. If I face him even once, maybe he won't." He exhaled slowly, setting the rifle aside. "Granite Springs is 2 days' ride through open country. No law but what you carry on your hip. Morgan's got reach. He'll hear about it before you get halfway there. Then I won't go alone," she said simply. He looked at her, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to the space between them, a space filled with unspoken fear and something deeper still. "You're asking me to walk you into danger. I'm asking you to help me walk toward freedom," she replied. The room fell silent again, except for the soft crackle of the fire. He studied her face, the strength beneath the weariness, the grace in her defiance. Then, with a weary sigh that carried both love and surrender. He said, "All right, we'll go to Granite Springs." Nora blinked, surprised. I won't send you off alone," he said, "and I won't let them take you without a fight." She shook her head. "You'll be marked an accomplice." He smiled faintly. "I've been called worse." That small flicker of humor so rare between them eased the air, if only for a heartbeat. Nora reached across the table then, her hand trembling slightly as it brushed his. "You don't have to do this for me." "I'm not," he said. "I'm doing it because it's right." Her eyes filled, and she looked away quickly, unwilling to let the tears fall. The next morning, Sheriff Henry Tanner rode out early from town and met them by the creek. The dawn light stretched long shadows across the grass, painting the world in golden gray. "You're sure about this?" Tanner asked Nora, his expression grim but respectful. She nodded. "Yes, I'll face them." He tipped his hat slightly. "Then you'll have my protection. I'll escort you as far as Granite Springs and see that the judge there hears you out." Caleb stepped forward. "I'm riding with her." Tanner eyed him for a long moment, then nodded. "Didn't think I could stop you." He turned back to Nora. "You know what you're walking into. Morgan's got influence money, friends in high places, but he also has a past that doesn't stand up well to light. If we can bring witnesses, we might turn this around." "I'll tell the truth," she said firmly. "That's all I have." Tanner's gaze softened. Sometimes that's all it takes. They packed light a change of clothes, food for the trail, and a single revolver in Caleb's saddlebag. Joe watched them from the porch, his hat pressed to his chest. "You come back, you hear?" he said gruffly. Caleb gave a short nod. "Keep the ranch standing till I do." As they rode out, the prairie opened wide before them, endless, windswept, unforgiving. Nora rode side saddle on a borrowed mare, her back straight despite the fear she carried. Caleb rode beside her, always half-turned, watching the horizon. They traveled in silence for a while, the sound of hooves steady against the earth. Then Nora spoke, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Do you think people can ever really start over?" "Caleb." He thought for a moment before answering. "I think the ones who've suffered the most usually know best how to begin again." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe there's hope for me yet." "There's more than hope," he said. "There's truth. And you've already got that on your side." The miles passed slowly, each one carrying them farther from the safety of Hollow Creek and closer to whatever awaited in Granite Springs. But for the first time in a long while, Nora felt the weight on her shoulders lift, not because danger had lessened, but because she was no longer running from it. She glanced at Caleb, his profile steady against the vast sky. The man who had found her broken on the road now rode beside her, not as a savior, but as something deeper, a kind of quiet faith made flesh. Whatever awaited them ahead, she would face it, and he would be there. As the mountains of Granite Springs came into view, the air grew thinner and the days longer. While Nora prepared to tell her story, Caleb rode out to find proof and the people who could speak the truth she carried in her heart. Granite Springs, 1879. The town was small but proud, a place carved out of stone and perseverance. The courthouse stood at the far end of Main Street, its wooden sign swaying in the mountain wind. Inside, Nora Ellis waited in the sheriff's holding room, her hands folded in her lap, eyes tracing the faint light that slipped through the bars of the narrow window. It wasn't a cell. Not exactly Sheriff Henry Tanner had promised her that, but it felt close enough. The walls were plain, the air cold, and the silence thick. Every sound, the creak of boots outside, the scratching of a pen in the next room echoed through her chest like thunder. She'd spent so long running that stillness itself now felt like judgment. But she wasn't alone anymore. Somewhere out there, Caleb Turner was riding, chasing down the truth that could save her. 2 days earlier, after they arrived in Granite Springs, Tanner had gone to file the necessary papers. The town's judge, Edwin Harmon, a man known for his integrity, agreed to hear Nora's case once evidence was presented. Until then, she would remain under watch. Caleb had listened quietly to every word, his hat held low in his hands. When the meeting ended, he walked Nora to the small holding room and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'll find them," he said simply. She looked up at him, fear and hope wrestling in her eyes. Who the ones who know what Morgan really is? And with that, he'd saddled his horse and ridden out before sunrise. The trail led him first to Riverside, a small settlement 2 hours east of Silver Creek. He'd heard whispers of a woman named Eliza Johnson, once a seamstress in Morgan's household, dismissed after speaking up against him. It took half a day of asking, waiting, and a few coins passed to a nervous shopkeeper before he found her. Eliza was younger than he'd imagined, barely 30, with a child on her hip and eyes that darted toward every shadow. When he introduced himself, she stiffened. "I don't want trouble," she said. Caleb nodded. "Neither do I. But a woman's life is hanging in the balance. Her name's Nora Ellis. She used to work for Elias Morgan, too." That name stopped her cold. The color drained from her face. He's still hurting people. Then, Caleb's voice softened. He tried to, but she fought back. And now he's calling her a thief. Eliza's jaw trembled. That sounds like him. Then help me stop him. She looked down at her child, rocking him gently as though the motion itself steadied her heart. "If I speak, he'll come after me." Caleb's gaze didn't waver. "He can't touch you anymore. Not if we bring the law down on him first." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she nodded slowly. "I'll tell you what he did. Everything. Maybe it's time someone did. That afternoon." Eliza gave a full statement, the things she'd seen, the women who'd left without a word, the bruises they tried to hide. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. Caleb wrote every word down with care, sealing the pages in his saddlebag when they were done. Before he left, she gripped his hand. "You tell that woman she's not alone." "I will," he said, and he meant it. Abu. When Caleb returned to Granite Springs 3 days later, the town was buzzing. Word had spread about the trial to be, how a woman accused of theft was claiming to be a victim instead. Some whispered sympathy, others muttered doubt. But when he walked into Tanner's office, the sheriff looked up with something close to relief. "You found her," Tanner said. "I did. And she talked." Caleb handed him the written statement. Eliza Johnson lived under Morgan's roof for 2 years, saw things no one should have seen. Tanner read a few lines and let out a slow breath. "This is good. Might not be enough on its own, but it's something." Caleb frowned. "Then we'll need more." The sheriff nodded. "Reeves sent a telegram this morning from Silver Creek. Says he's found another witness, a woman named Sarah Benson. She used to work for Morgan's shipping office. He's sending her written testimony by courier. For the first time in days, Caleb felt something he hadn't dared to hope. Then we might just have him cornered. That evening, as the last light faded from the hills, Caleb went to see Nora. She was sitting by the small window, a single candle flickering beside her. When she turned at the sound of his boots, her eyes filled with quiet relief. "You came back," she whispered. "I told you I would." He set the papers down on the table between them. "Eliza Johnson. She worked for Morgan. She's told her story the truth. You weren't the only one he hurt. Nora." Her hands trembled as she reached for the pages. "Someone believed me." He nodded. "More than one. Deputy Reeves found another Sarah Benson. Her statement's on its way." Nora closed her eyes, a tear slipping free. I thought no one ever would." Caleb sat across from her, his voice low and steady. "You're not alone in this anymore. Tomorrow, we'll bring it all before the judge. Tanner's on our side, and so's the law, at least the part of it that still remembers what justice means." She looked up at him, her expression soft but resolute. "You risked everything for me." He shook his head. "Not everything. Just what was worth risking." The faintest smile touched her lips, weary, but real. For the first time since he'd found her on that dusty road, her eyes held something that looked like peace. Outside, the wind shifted through the valley, carrying the scent of pine and the distant sound of the river below. The town had gone quiet, waiting for morning. Inside the sheriff's office, two people sat beneath the glow of a single candle, a cowboy and a woman who had finally found the courage to stop running. The next day, as the courthouse bell rang and the people of Granite Springs gathered, the truth that had been buried beneath fear began to rise. For the first time, Nora would face her accuser not as a fugitive, but as a woman ready to reclaim her name. The morning broke crisp and clear, the kind of sky that seemed too blue for what it held. Granite Springs had come alive with whispers. From the blacksmith's porch to the steps of the post office, townsfolk murmured about the trial about the woman accused of stealing from Elias Morgan, the respected merchant of Silver Creek. Some said she'd fooled a good man and deserved whatever came. Others said there was more to the story, that maybe justice didn't always wear the cleanest boots. But everyone agreed on one thing. It wasn't every day that a woman stood up against a man like Morgan. Inside the courthouse, the air was thick with dust and judgment. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, cutting pale lines across the wooden floor. At the front sat Judge Edwin Harmon, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, known for being fair but never sentimental. And to his right, Sheriff Henry Tanner stood quietly, hat in hand. Across the room, Caleb Turner sat beside Nora Ellis, his rough palms folded tightly on his knees. She wore a simple blue dress borrowed from the sheriff's wife, nothing fancy, but clean, steady. Her face was calm, though her fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve in nervous rhythm. Then the doors opened. Elias Morgan entered like a man accustomed to being watched. His suit was fine, his boots polished, his expression the perfect mask of a wronged gentleman. When his gaze met Nora's, a flicker of cold satisfaction crossed his face, fleeting but unmistakable. "Court is now in session," Judge Harmon announced, his voice echoing through the hall. Morgan's lawyer, a sharp, narrow man with a voice like sandpaper, stepped forward. "Your Honor, we are here because this woman," he began, pointing toward Nora, "has stolen not only valuables from my client, but his reputation as a man of integrity. She fled Silver Creek under false pretenses, taking with her a gold locket, money, and other personal property. We have witnesses to her deceit." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Then it was Nora's turn. Tanner gave her a reassuring nod as he stood. "Your Honor, Miss Ellis has never denied that she fled Silver Creek. What she denies and what we aim to prove is the story told about why she did." Judge Harmon gestured for him to proceed. Tanner called Eliza Johnson to the stand. Eliza rose from the front bench, her hands trembling slightly as she walked forward. She looked small in the vastness of the room, but her eyes held steady. After swearing her oath, she began to speak at first softly, then stronger with each word. She told of her time working for Morgan's household, of his temper and his unwanted advances, of the night he dismissed her for refusing him. Her voice cracked only once, when she spoke of another girl, younger, quieter, who left without saying goodbye and was never seen again. When she finished, you could hear the creak of wood as men shifted uneasily in their seats. Morgan's lawyer leapt up. Baseless accusations from a bitter former employee. Judge Harmon raised a hand. She swore under oath, "You will show respect." Then Tanner produced the telegram from Deputy Samuel Reeves, containing Sarah Benson's written testimony, another woman, another victim, this time from Morgan's own freight office. Her words were clear, factual, and damning. "He threatened me when I refused him. He said no one would believe me over him. I left town with nothing but shame and fear. If Nora Ellis is on trial, then so should he be." The silence that followed felt heavier than the room could hold. Morgan's face had gone pale, his jaw set tight. "Lies," he spat. "All of it. Lies told by women who want money or pity. Look at her." He pointed at Nora, his voice rising. "She's nothing. She enough." Judge Harmon's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Mr. Morgan, you will conduct yourself with civility, or I will hold you in contempt." The merchant's face twisted with fury, but he sat down. Harmon turned his gaze toward Nora. "Miss Ellis, do you wish to make a statement?" She stood, her hands clasped before her, and for a moment she looked no different from any other woman in that town, weary, plain, and unremarkable. But when she spoke, her voice carried a quiet strength that reached even the corners of the room. "I don't expect anyone to believe me because I'm a woman," she began, "but I've lived with the weight of his lies long enough. I worked for Elias Morgan. I did my job with honesty. The night he came to me, I told him no. And when I did, he took from me the one thing I had left of my mother, a silver locket. It wasn't his, but he said it would be payment for my pride. So yes, I took it back. Not because I wanted to steal, but because I couldn't let him own what wasn't his." She paused, her voice trembling but never breaking. "You can call that theft if you want, but I call it taking back what he never deserved." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Even the air seemed to still. Then Judge Harmon leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Sheriff Tanner," he said quietly, "retrieve that locket from evidence." Tanner placed it on the table, before the judge a small, worn silver pendant engraved with the initials M.E. The sight of it made Nora's breath hitch. Judge Harmon turned the locket over in his hand, studying it. Then he looked up. "Mr. Morgan, your mark is not on this, nor your claim. And from what I've heard today, your reputation may need more defense than your property." He paused, letting the words hang in the air before speaking again. The charges against Miss Nora Ellis are hereby dismissed. She is free to go. Furthermore, this court recommends a formal inquiry into the conduct of Mr. Elias Morgan regarding the statements given under oath. The sound that filled the room wasn't applause, not exactly. It was something quieter, more profound. A collective breath released. A sigh of justice long overdue. Nora's knees nearly gave out, but Caleb was there, steadying her. She turned to him, tears glimmering like glass in her eyes. "It's over," she whispered. He nodded, his voice rough. "It's just beginning." Outside, as the courthouse doors swung open, sunlight poured over them. The townsfolk stood watching, some curious, some shamed, some quietly proud. For the first time in months, Nora Ellis stepped into the light not as a fugitive, but as a woman free. That evening, under a sky streaked with rose and gold, Caleb and Nora rode back toward Hollow Creek. They didn't speak much. There was nothing left to explain. Some journeys end not with a victory, but with a homecoming. The road out of Granite Springs stretched long and quiet, bordered by golden grass and the distant hum of crickets. The weight that had once bent Nora Ellis's shoulders seemed to lift with every mile, like dust shaken from old sorrow. She rode side saddle beside Caleb Turner, the man who had believed her when no one else would. For a while, they didn't need words. The rhythm of hooves, the creak of leather, and the sigh of the wind between the cottonwoods said enough. Above them, the sun was sinking low that tender hour, when day and night meet without struggle, when forgiveness seems possible. When they reached the ridge overlooking Hollow Creek Ranch, Nora drew a breath. "I almost forgot how beautiful it is," she whispered. Caleb looked over at her, his expression soft but unreadable. "You never really saw it. Not like this." She turned to him, smiling faintly. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Last time you came down this road, you were hurt, scared, running. Now you're not." Her gaze lingered on him, the quiet strength in his face, the steadiness in his voice. "And what about you, Caleb Turner? You still running from ghosts of your own?" He smiled a small, knowing smile. "Maybe, but it feels like they don't follow me as close anymore." They rode the last stretch in silence. When they reached the ranch gate, Joe Hanley, Caleb's old hand, was waiting on the porch, pipe in hand and eyes glistening. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, grinning. "Didn't reckon I'd see the day you'd bring her home, and the world wouldn't be on fire." Nora laughed, and even Caleb couldn't help but smile. It was the first sound of real joy the ranch had heard in months. Moi! That night, the three of them sat by the fire, as they always had, the same wooden table, the same smell of coffee and wood smoke, but everything felt different. The shadows on the walls no longer looked so long. Joe told stories of the early days on the range, when storms tore down fences faster than they could build them. Nora listened, her chin resting on her hand, her eyes alive in the firelight. Caleb barely spoke. He just watched her, as though he were still afraid she might vanish if he blinked too long. When Joe finally turned in, the house grew quiet again. Only the crackle of embers filled the room. Nora stood by the window, looking out into the dark stretch of land. "You ever think," she said softly, "how strange it is that something as wild as this could feel like home?" Caleb set down his cup and walked over to her. "It's not the land that makes it home," he said. "It's who you share it with." She turned, and for a moment, the space between them felt fragile, like a held breath. Then he reached out, hesitantly, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "You don't have to stay," he said. You've got your freedom now. You could go anywhere. Start fresh." Nora smiled gently, her eyes shining. "Freedom doesn't mean being alone. It means choosing where you belong." He swallowed hard, his voice low. "And where do you belong?" "Nora." Her answer came quiet, but sure. "Right here, if you'll have me." The words hung between them, simple and steady. Caleb's hand found hers, rough and warm. For the first time since that fateful day on the road, both of them let their guards fall, not with passion, but with peace. He drew her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I've loved you since the day I saw you limping toward the horizon," he murmured. "Didn't know what it was, then just knew I couldn't ride past." Nora laughed softly, tears glinting like stars. "And I thought I was just a burden. You were never that," he said. "You were the reason I stopped drifting." Outside, the night deepened. Somewhere beyond the barn, a coyote called mournful, but not lonely. A few weeks later, they were married in the small white chapel of Granite Springs. There were no grand carriages, no music, no lace, just a handful of neighbors, Sheriff Tanner and Joe standing as witness. Nora wore a simple cotton dress. Caleb had polished his boots, though the dust clung stubbornly to them all the same. When the minister asked if they took each other for better or worse, come what may, they didn't hesitate. Afterward, as they stepped out into the sunlight, a gust of wind swept through the valley, scattering petals from the wildflowers Nora had carried. She laughed, watching them dance through the air. Caleb took her hand and kissed it, an old-fashioned gesture, but one that felt right. Joe called out from behind them, "Well, you two going to stand there all day or head home? Got fences need mending and hearts need feeding." They both laughed, and the world felt lighter. Years passed quietly after that. The ranch grew slowly, stubbornly, like everything that endures in the frontier. Nora planted a garden near the back porch, and every spring it bloomed wild with color. Caleb built a small swing under the oak tree by the creek, where he would later sit with their children, Grace, Eli, and Rose, telling stories about the early days when the West was still young and every sunrise felt like a promise. Nora never stopped writing letters for the women of Granite Springs widows, settlers, mothers who couldn't read or write, giving voice to those who had none. Sometimes, when the evenings turned cool, she would sit by the fire, the old silver locket glinting at her throat, and think of how far she'd come. Every scar, every mile of road, every tear had led her here to this quiet, ordinary happiness. One evening, many years later, Caleb found her sitting on the porch, watching the sun melt into the horizon. He leaned against the railing beside her. "You thinking about the past again?" She smiled softly. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you just kept riding that day." He chuckled. "Guess I'd still be talking to my horse instead of you." Nora laughed that same warm, low laugh that had first made him believe in peace again. "Then I'm glad you stopped. So am I," he said, reaching over to take her hand. "Every good thing I ever had started the moment I did." The sky above them flamed gold, then pink, then the deep blue of evening. The wind moved through the grass in gentle waves, like the land itself was breathing. And there, on the porch of a modest ranch in the middle of nowhere, two lives that had once been broken found their quiet forever. Years would come and go, and the West would change around them railroads, towns, and the slow march of time. But for Caleb and Nora, Love wasn't a story of grand gestures or miracles. It was the daily grace of two people who chose, again and again, to stay. Oh. The wind that once howled through Hollow Creek Ranch now carried gentler songs, the laughter of children, the low hum of cattle grazing on wide, golden pastures. The land that had once been harsh and untamed had grown softer with the years, as if it too had settled into peace. Caleb Turner stood on the porch one morning, watching the sun rise over the ridges. His hands, once calloused from the restless miles of youth, now bore the quiet marks of a man who had built something lasting. The barn roofs gleamed under the light, the fences stood straight, and beyond them, 3 small figures were racing toward the creek, their children, Grace, Eli, and Rose, shouting and laughing as the dogs followed close behind. He smiled, a deep, contented smile that came from somewhere beyond words. Behind him, Nora Ellis Turner stepped out. Her shawl wrapped around her shoulders despite the warmth. Her hair had turned to silver in places, but her eyes, still that soft shade of green that first caught the light on that long-ago road, hadn't dimmed. "You're up early," she said gently, leaning beside him on the railing. He chuckled. Old habits die slow. They watched the children play for a while, their laughter carrying across the fields like birdsong. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked after a pause. "About what?" "The road," she said softly. "That day. The dust. The heat. The way you looked at me and didn't ask for anything in return." He turned to her, his eyes full of quiet affection. "I think about it every time I see you walk across this porch. I never thought stopping that day would give me everything I didn't know I was missing." She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Maybe some things were meant to be found the hard way. The years had not always been easy. There were winters when the snow fell too early, when the cattle thinned and the larder ran low. There were springs when fever swept through the valley, taking neighbors and friends before their time. But through it all, Caleb and Nora stood side by side, not untouched by hardship, but unbroken by it. When the rail line came through Dakota, bringing merchants and strangers to the nearby town, some said the old life was fading, but to Caleb, progress was just another storm to ride through. He had weathered worse, and now he had something worth protecting. On Sundays, they would ride into Granite Springs, where the small chapel they'd been married in still stood. The same minister, older now and half blind, would nod to them from the steps, and the townsfolk would smile the Turners. Everyone called them the couple who had once defied scandal and come out stronger. Nora often lingered by the churchyard fence afterward, laying a hand on the cool wood. Sometimes she'd whisper a prayer, not for miracles, but for gratitude, for the life she'd been given when she thought she'd lost everything. As the children grew, so too did the ranch. Eli, their eldest, took to the horses early, breaking colts with the same quiet patience as his father. Grace, thoughtful and kind, kept the books and learned to write letters for the neighbors, just as her mother once had. Rose, the youngest, had Nora's stubborn heart fearless, sharp-tongued, and unafraid of the wide, wild world waiting beyond the fences. One evening, after supper, Caleb sat on the porch with a pipe in hand, while the girls strung flowers through each other's hair. Eli was mending a saddle under the lamplight. Nora watched them all, her expression soft with wonder. "Do you ever think," she said quietly, "that we've lived enough for 2 lives?" Caleb smiled. "Some days I think we've lived 10. She laughed, shaking her head. I used to think happiness was something people found. Turns out it's something they build, nail by nail, day after day." He nodded. "Guess we did a fair bit of building, didn't we?" She reached over and took his hand. "You built the house. Caleb, I just made sure the lights stayed in it." "Oh, Nanicho." As the years rolled on, they began to see their legacy not just in the land, but in the people they'd touched. Eliza Johnson had moved to town, opening a small dress shop that catered to the settlers' wives. Sarah Benson had married a teacher from the East and often visited in the summers. Even Sheriff Tanner, now retired, would drop by from time to time, bringing his old stories and his quiet humor. They all said the same thing. "You two gave us hope when the world had gone mean." Caleb would always shrug at that, uncomfortable with praise. But Nora knew. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, stopping for a stranger, believing a truth no one else would ripple further than a man can ever see. One autumn evening, when the first frost had begun to silver the grass, Caleb sat alone on the porch, watching the horizon. The sun was setting low, painting the valley in gold and amber. He could hear Nora humming inside an old tune, soft and slow, the same one she'd sung to their children when they were small. He thought about the years, the fear, the fight, the love that had carried them through it all. He thought of that first day on the road, when a wounded woman had stumbled out of the dust and changed everything he believed about grace. When Nora stepped out beside him, wrapping her shawl tighter, he reached for her hand. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "what might have happened if I'd just kept riding that day?" She smiled, her eyes reflecting the fire of the sunset. "You wouldn't have, Caleb Turner. That's not who you are." He chuckled softly. "Maybe not. But I sure am glad I didn't." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat together as the last light faded. Behind them, laughter echoed from the kitchen. Their children grown now, home for the harvest, their voices weaving through the air like threads of memory. The night settled gently over the valley, and in the quiet hum of crickets and the faraway call of an owl, time seemed to fold in on itself. This was the life they had built, not perfect, not easy, but theirs. And in the end, that was enough. In the heart of the American frontier, where storms once ruled and loneliness stretched farther than sight, Caleb and Nora Turner found something rare, not a legend, not a miracle, but the quiet triumph of two souls who refused to let the world make them bitter. And long after they were gone, when travelers passed the wide fields of Hollow Creek and saw the lights glowing from the old ranch house, they'd say it still felt alive, as if love itself had taken root there and never left. In the quiet heart of this story, beneath the dust of the frontier and the echo of hooves, lies a truth that feels timeless, that kindness, even when it costs us something, can change everything. Caleb Turner didn't know who Nora Ellis was when he stopped his horse that day. He didn't know her past, her pain, or the danger she carried. But he chose compassion over fear, and that choice became the beginning of healing for both of them. Their journey reminds us that life's greatest transformations often begin in the smallest moments, a gesture of help, a word of belief, a promise kept when the world turns away. In a time and place where the land was hard and mercy was rare, they built a home out of trust and proved that love isn't born out of grand romance, but out of the quiet courage to stay, forgive, and keep building together one sunrise at a time. And maybe that's what still speaks to us today. No matter how far we've come from the old frontier, We're all still walking our own dusty roads, sometimes limping, sometimes lost waiting for someone to stop and remind us that we are worth saving, worth loving, worth coming home to. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Frontier Hearts. Your support keeps these stories of hope, resilience, and enduring love-alive stories that remind us that even in the wildest places, kindness still has a home. Thank you for listening, friend. Until next time, ride safe and carry a little bit of grace wherever the road takes you.